See, in this slide, if you can see, I have tried to give subject-wise overall coverage from the year 2011 to 2019. What are the major subjects from where questions have been asked in the past? And if you see the distribution pattern of the question, you see that economy, takes the maximum share of 22%. And mind you, this is average of 2011 to 2019. There have been occasions when economy even went to the extent of occupying space between 27 to 32% in couple of years. So very important from the prelims perspective that you are strong on the fundamentals related to economy as well as the current affairs related to economy. See, in this series of lectures, today happens to be the first lecture. So be patient. In the times to come before prelims, we would be interacting on multiple occasions wherein we'll try to cover major aspects related to our prelims coverage as regards the subject of economics is concerned. Okay. So as you can see, 22% share is of economy, then geography 17, history 16, 17 polity, 18 environment and science and technology 10%. I have always been telling my students that the UPSC prelims preparation per se is dependent on five broad pillars. The five broad pillars constitute your economy, your polity, your history, your environment, and current affairs. And if you see those five pillars, if you make a calculation, an informed guess, you can say that around 75 to 80% of the questions come from these domains. So even if you aspire to get 105 to 110, something like that, if you can master these basic five subjects before the prelims examination, I think you should be very much there. Okay, moving ahead with the next. Just see. And the number of questions that have been asked. Just I said, no, this is an average, 22% is an average. So it varies from year to year. See, and the various sectors from where questions come, if you can see in the past few years, the importance of this particular segment, the number of questions. You see, in the year 2019 and 2013, the number of questions asked close to 9 or 10 from these monetary and fiscal policy. It means 20 to 25 marks you can gain in prelims examination from just one particular segment within the economy, that is banking, monetary and the fiscal policy of the government, right? So over a period of time, if you can observe the orange lines and the light blue lines which signify 2018 and 19. See, from agriculture, two questions compulsorily will come. From external sector, that is your foreign trade policy, your foreign direct investments, foreign portfolio investments, balance of payments and other things, right? And when you see this international organizations, number of questions are coming in very large numbers. See, 2016 here was an exception when 7 questions came from international organization. But general trend is around 2 to 3 questions will surely come. When we move to the right, to the extreme right, we have one segment called various schemes and programs of the government. Here also, you can expect 2 to 3 questions coming from this. And the national income, your GDP, your, what you call real GDP, nominal GDP, and other factors of your national income also constitute a major chunk. But when you see overall, you definitely find that this is one sector which is taking a very prominent place when it comes to economy. So all our lectures would be designed in a way to cover these particular segments in complete detail. Yeah. See, these are, not fresh questions. What we have done is in the past 9-10 years, whatever questions have been asked in the past, this particular presentation today is aimed to make you understand that what type of questions will come. And when you read a document having some data related to economics, with what perspective in your mind you have to read that while trying to guess that a question can be framed from this data, in this particular line of thought, right? Starting with our today's questions. With reference to Indian economy, consider the following statements. It says the rate of growth of real GDP has steadily increased in the past. And the second statement says the gross domestic product at market price has steadily increased in the last decade. The GDP at the market price is your basically your nominal GDP, right? So this question came somewhere between 2016 and 17 prelims, right? So that particular point of time, they were trying to make this was in the news, making headlines because of our growth rate being very high. So there was a lot of talk in the market that our gross domestic product has considerably increased over a period of time. So I always tell my students that UPSC is a direct reflection of what is happening in the economy. So whatever is happening in the economy, you have to be attentive and you have to find out why this particular issue is being discussed. So the question here states that the rate of growth of real GDP has steadily increased. The most important aspect in this question is that word steadily increased. This is an incorrect statement. Why? Because real GDP, as we all are aware, it takes into consideration the inflation factor as well. The basic difference between the real GDP and the nominal GDP is the real GDP takes into account the inflation effect and the nominal GDP is basically at the market prices. So the first statement that the rate of growth of real GDP has steadily increased in the last decade is a wrong statement, right? Then coming to the second statement, the GDP at market prices has steadily increased in the last decade. So keeping the 2016-17 time frame into mind, this statement is a correct statement. That is how the correct answer here would be question answer B, that is 2 only, right? Next. See, I have given a small, brief about what is, nominal GDP and what is real GDP. It says nominal GDP, value of output measured at actual prices, that is current dollar output, or in case of India, it is current, rupee output. Does not correct for inflation. This is most important. A question can be asked from this perspective also. While the real GDP, it eliminates the effect of inflation. So it takes into account the effect of inflation as well. Okay. Next, a decrease in tax to GDP ratio of a country indicates which of the following? The question is a decrease in the tax to GDP ratio of a country indicates which of the following? Slowing economic growth rate and less equitable distribution of national income. Yes, if the tax to GDP is reducing, it signifies that the economic growth rate of the country is slowing down, because of the reduced rate of economic growth, the collection with respect to tax also reduces simultaneously. That is how slowing economic growth rate is a correct statement. Next, less equitable distribution of national income. It means that there is a unequal distribution of whatever income is being generated. That is the reason why the collection on tax on GDP is also getting negatively affected. So this is also a correct statement. That is why the correct answer here would be option C. That is both 1 and 2. Okay. Next. Yeah, this was this human capital has always been in the discussion whenever any policy related decision is being made. Okay. So consider the following statements. Human capital formation as a concept is better explained in terms of process which enables. See, this is human capital, right? It is not economic capital. Very, very important. You must understand the difference between the human capital and the economic capital here, right? What do understand by human capital? The basic difference. What is the basic difference? See, if we read the definition of human capital formation, it says that Human capital formation, it's a process of acquiring and increasing the number of people who have the required education standards and experience, which is essential for the economic and political development of a country. So here two aspects are very very important. One is education, and the second is your experience in the economic, that can contribute positively towards the economic development of our country. So in this case we are only talking about the individual here and not any economic related concept here. So it as a concept is better explained in terms of a process which enables individuals of a country to accumulate more capital. This is a wrong statement, because here we are not talking about individuals capitals here, right? So it is a wrong statement. Next, increasing the knowledge, skills and capabilities of the people of the country. Yes, as we have said, education one of the important prerequisites. So here we are trying to improve the knowledge and skill levels and capacities of the people. So it is a correct statement. Accumulation of tangible wealth. Again, tangible wealth is related to your economic capital and not human capital. So that is how option 3 is also incorrect. And accumulation of intangible wealth, this is intangible wealth. Your experience is intangible wealth. Your knowledge in a specific domain is a intangible wealth. So the correct option would be option 2 and 4. That is how the correct option here is option C, that is 2 and 4. Okay, next. Yeah, with reference to India's 5-year plans, which of the following statements is oblique are correct? From second 5-year plan, there was a determined thrust towards substitution. Very very important word here, substitution of basic and capital good industries. If you are aware, as part of our second 5-year plan, we move towards heavy industries. If you remember the Mahalanobis model of development, where we spoke about more of capital intensive industries which can spur the economic growth that will lead to development of our country in the larger run. So the word substitution is exactly opposite to what second 5-year plan said. It did not substitute, it in fact necessitated the need for more capital good industries. So that is how first statement is a wrong statement. Next, the fourth 5-year plan adopted the objective of correcting the earlier trend of increased concentration of wealth and economic power. Yes, this was one of the address areas or reference points of the fourth 5-year plan. So this is a correct statement, right? When we come to the third statement, in the fifth 5-year plan, for the first time, the financial sector was included as an integral part of the plan. See, what happens is, in technically, actually, we do not know the exact 5-year plan where this was first, financial sector was first included. Some government document says that the 5-year plan which came after 1991, this was for the first time where the financial sector was included as an integral part of the plan. So going by that government document, it can be said that it was not, definitely not the fifth 5-year plan, maybe your eighth 5-year plan. So that is how the third, what you call point is also incorrect. That is how the correct option would be option B, that is 2 only. See now, because see this planning as a subject, the planning as a subject for prelims is very important from the perspective that these 5-year plans though have been done away with now, but however the various developments in the planning paradigm of our country, that is very very important. So a question in future lectures I will try to explain much more what type of questions we might get from the planning slide. Okay, planning domain of economy. Next, which of the following can be said to be essentially the parts of inclusive governance? See, inclusive governance See, is a concept where we try to take in even the last person in the hierarchy of economy, so that he is also positively affected because of the growth in the economy, right? It says permitting the non-banking financial companies to do banking. See, when we say inclusive governance here, or includes financial inclusion, actually financial inclusion could have been a best term to be used, but they have used inclusive governance. So now, see, now here they say, as we all are aware, NBFCs, the non-banking financial companies, you might be aware that they are also called as shadow banks. They are also called as shadow banks. In our current affairs topic today, I would be discussing about the NBFCs in detail, but as a precursor to our detailed discussion, see, the NBFCs play a very very important role. As per a what you call a document of the RBI, it says that presently around 97 lakh crore worth of credit has been distributed in the economy. 97 lakh crores worth of credit has been distributed. Out of this, 24 crores has been given by the NBFCs. The NBFCs is a segment basically who target the diverse needs or the financial needs of bank excluded customers, because there are very strict norms which the banks are supposed to follow to lend it to somebody. So the people who are excluded from the financial credit what you call structuring of the formal banks, NBFCs play an important role there. So permitting the NBFC companies to do the banking, it is also an essentially part of inclusive governance by the government. So the first statement is correct. Second, establishing effective district planning committees in all the districts. This planning committees, the district planning committees, as you would have read in your regular classroom setting as well, they are responsible to chart out the annual requirement of various business, agriculture, and other establishments in their districts, to find out what is the annual fund requirement of these people. You might be aware, the LDMs and the district development officers of NABARD, the lead district manager of RBI. So these people are responsible. These people are responsible to prepare a district, are part of the district planning committee, who are responsible to carve out what is the overall requirement in that particular district. So establishing effective district planning committee will only add to our inclusive governance, what we call aim. Third, increasing the government spending on public health. Yes, a very very important aspect, because most of the people in the unorganized sector do not have health coverage to them. So this having this increasing the government spending on health will only support their expenditure on health. That is how it will lead to inclusive governance. Strengthening the midday meal scheme. See, the midday meal scheme is one of the most successful programs of the government, through which an effort is made to ensure high enrollment and sustenance rate of the students in the schools. So, if these students are subjected to quality education over a period of time, it will also lead to inclusive governance. So, that is how the correct option here would be option D, where 1, 2, 3, and 4, all the statements are correctly explained. Okay. See, from the industry and infrastructure, in the past, 70% of the questions have come from the industry and 30% have come from the domain of infrastructure. So this is for your information. Okay. Next, public finance. Very, very, very important aspect when it comes to your prelims. In the context of India, which of the following factors is or are contributor or contributors to reducing the risk of a currency crisis? See, you must be aware what all factors determine the effectiveness of a currency. Basically, the economic standing of that particular country is most important factor which determines the health of the currency of a particular country. In India, as we are aware, the maximum of our dollar earning other than our exports comes from the services sector like IT, pharma sector, and also remittances from abroad. So here in the options, the foreign currency earnings of India's IT sector, definitely it will have an impact on the foreign currency earnings of our country. And secondly, increasing the government expenditure. This government expenditure has got no role to play because here they are asking contributor to reducing the risk. If the expenditure of the government is increased, leading to a fiscal deficit scenario, that may negatively affect your currency. So it is not reducing the risk, it is rather increasing the risk of a currency crisis. So second statement is a wrong statement. And lastly, remittances from Indians abroad. Yes, this is also a major factor related to our currency stability and all. The exchange rate of our currency. That is how the correct option here would be option B, that is 1 and 3, right? See, in the classroom setting also, we have covered in detail about, balance of payment and all. So what all constitutes the current account, what all constitutes the capital account. So the questions on these, thematic questions on these concepts can also be framed into a question and asked, okay? Again, public finance, right? See, why, what the role RBI is playing in the public finances, as we all are aware that the Reserve Bank of India is the accountant to the central government and the state governments, right? So now, any interaction of the government with the public has to be through the platform of Reserve Bank of India. So that is how, in the domain of public finance, you are hearing the name of Reserve Bank of India, right? It says, consider the following statements. The Reserve Bank of India manages and services Government of India's securities, but not any state government securities. See, this statement is very, very important. Why? Because the state government securities can also be what you call serviced by Reserve Bank of India based on a request by that state. And in our country, mostly all the state governments take the services of Reserve Bank of India. So the first statement, only services but not. So that is how this is a wrong statement. Second, the treasury bills are issued by the Government of India and there are no treasury bills issued by the state governments. As we would have covered in our, in the normal classroom settings, that, state governments do not issue the treasury bills. It is issued by the what you call central government alone. And what do the state governments issue? They do not issue treasury bills. They issue development bonds, right? They issue the development bonds, right? Next, so that is how the second statement is correct. And the third statement, treasury bills offer are issued. Actually, it should be often, not offer. Treasury bills often are issued at a discount from the par value. Yes, this is also a correct statement. That is how the correct option here would be option 2 and option 3. See, the treasury bills are issued by the Government of India through RBI. Government of India through the Reserve Bank of India. This you have to understand. And the treasury bills are short-term credit instruments, basically where the maturity is less than 1. Okay. Yeah. See, this question again, this last decade was with perspective to the year when this question was asked. It is not with perspective to 2020. It is with perspective to the year in which this particular question could have been asked, right? Now, the tax revenue as a percentage of GDP of India has steadily increased in the last decade. So if this question was asked after the implementation of GST, then definitely this would have been a Wrong statement. Why? Because the tax revenue as a percentage of GDP has got negatively affected in the first couple of years because of the initial phase of implementation of the GST. So that is how the first statement here stands wrong. And the fiscal deficit of as a percentage of GDP of India has steadily increased in the last decade. This is also an incorrect statement. It has seen lot of ups and downs. It has seen lot of ups and downs. If you want to know information related to 2020 of these particular two aspects, it has been given very, very clearly in the economic survey summary that has been given to you by the institute. I suggest we'll have a special session on economic survey, but still, okay, if you want to know in the meanwhile, if these kind of questions come, what could be your approach? I suggest you go through the economic survey. So in this particular case, the correct option is option D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Next, public finance. Again, which of the following is oblique are included in the capital budget of the government of India? Very, very important aspect from the public finance, capital budget. You know what, we know what is capital budget, right? What a budget, where the money is basically allocated for, acquiring capital assets such as your land, your buildings, etc. Right? So expenditure on acquisition of assets like roads, buildings, machinery, etc. It is a correct statement. Loans received from the foreign governments, they also come under the capital budget under the head capital receipts. Right? So there is a repayment obligation, but still they are considered to be as capital receipts, right? And lastly, loans and advances granted to the states and union territories. This is also part of your what you call public finance under the heading capital budget of the government of India. So this is a capital payment basically, right? So the correct option would be option D, that is 1, 2 and 3, right? Next. So next we are going to cover the monetary policy related kind of questions. Just imagine the domains in which all these questions are scattered. And if you see, the maximum chunk of the questions are from your monetary policy, are from questions pertaining to money supply in the market, and also related to various types of banks. You remember those payment banks, small finance banks, your non-banking financial companies, questions related to your commercial banks. So many questions have been asked in the past. So lot of chunk is taken over by these 3-4 aspects. So when you prepare for the 2020 prelims, you have to master these domains based on the experience in the past 9 years. So definitely, as far as my guess goes, 3 to 4 questions will surely come from these 3 domains itself. Other than that, over a period of time, questions pertaining to the functioning or the policy related issues from RBI are also being asked directly by the UPSC. So you have to cover the various aspects related to RBI, its functioning, its policy decisions, its regulatory practices and other things have to be covered in complete detail. And this year, the payment system, that is your NPCI and all, is also very, very important from the examination perspective. So these 4-5 domains you have to cover up. And if you are aware as regards the Basel norms, the Basel norms also this year in news. If you people have, what you call heard the RBI governor's recent address to the nation, which went out around 1.5 hours or so, he spoke about something related to Basel norms here. Counter cyclical capital buffer. CCCB. We were supposed to, implement the last tranche of the CCCB of 0.625%, by 31st March 2020. So he spoke something related to this. Please go and have a look. Basically, we have extended the timeline for implementation of this counter cyclical capital buffer and all. So important from the examination perspective, right? Yeah, the first question from Money and Banking, the question asked was, which of the following is not included in the assets of a commercial bank in India? Very, very, simple and straight question. As I said, say for example, this is our State Bank of India. The moment you say that this State Bank of India, it receives money from multiple sources and it lends money to multiple sources. This multiple sources from where the SBI will receive money could be its own capital where the shareholders are investing money. It could be Reserve Bank of India. It could borrow from the other banks as well, or it could go to the general public for raising some money, right? These are some of the sources. Because there is a repayment obligation to all these entities, this is called the liabilities. When I said going to the general public means basically there I am talking about their deposits. So basic from where maximum money to a bank comes is through the deposits from the general public. So all this constitutes the liabilities of our any bank per se. Here we have taken the example of State Bank of India. Any further lending, it could be to any bank, it could be to the general public, or it could be to any enterprise. So anywhere it is, it could be any investment also. So wherever it is happening, these are basically the assets of the what you call bank. These are the liabilities and these are the assets. Now we'll go back to the question. Which of the following is not included in the asset? It means which of the following is the liability of a commercial bank? So advances is an asset, as we know. Deposit, yes, it is a liability. So that is how the correct option here is B, deposits, right? This money at call and short notice, right, is the asset of the bank, because here the bank would have extended some loan to other banks in the call market through a platform called interbank lending rate, IBLR, right? We'll dwell about them in much more detail whenever we go for our domain classes. Next, money and banking. What was the purpose of intercreditor agreement signed by the Indian banks and financial institutions recently? See, this recently was because this question was asked in the year 2016. So that is how the word recently is there, but it is not recent. But there are some decisions which have happened in the recent past on the intercreditor agreement that can find a place in your prelims 2020 examination. It says first, to lessen the government of India's perennial burden of fiscal deficit and current account deficit. It has got nothing to do with that. To support the infrastructure projects of central and state governments, maybe, may not be, so that is how it is a wrong statement. To act as an independent regulator in case of application for loans of rupees 50 crore or more, it has got nothing to do with regulation, it is an incorrect statement. To aim at faster resolution of stressed assets of 50 crore or more which are under consortium lending. This word consortium lending is very, very important. See, this consortium lending refers to a condition when two or more lenders, lenders join together to finance a single borrower. It is called consortium lending. So with respect to ICA, A means faster resolution of stressed assets of 50 crores or more which are under consortium lending. Now, in the current affairs related to this, very recently they have come to a conclusion that mandatory requirements for lenders to enter into an ICA during the review of the borrower account within 30 days from the date of first default. If there is a first default within the 30 days, they have to come into a ICA, then come into a inter-creditor agreement, where either 75% by value or 60% of lenders come along to form a inter-creditor agreement. So these figures of 30 days, 75% value or 60% by the number of lenders is very, very important from the prelims perspective this year. So the correct question, the correct option for this question is option D. It aims at faster resolution of stressed assets of 50 crores or more, which are under consortium lending. Very, very important. It is also called consortium lending, is generally also called loan syndication, but there are some technical differences, but they generally call it as loan syndication also. If we go much deeper into the subject, there are some very minute differences between consortium lending and loan syndicates, but they are generally called loan syndications. Next. Money and banking, another question. Which one of the following is not the most likely measure the government or RBI takes to stop the slide of Indian rupee? They are asking not the most likely measure. Not the most likely measure here. We have to see this, right? Here, though I have bolded not, I have put it in bold, but UPSC will not do this. You have to be very, very careful with this. Okay. Now, curbing the import of non-essential goods and promoting exports. Yes, this is how you will reduce the outflow of, what you call dollars, and this is how you will increase the inflow of your dollars. Yes, this is one of the methods, one of the ways the RBI will try to stop the slide of the Indian rupee. So, but they are asking not. That is how this is an incorrect statement. Next, encouraging Indian borrowers to issue rupee denominated masala bonds. This is also one of the ways of stopping the slide of Indian rupee. So that is how this is also not statement, not a what you call correct statement. See, masala bonds are rupee denominated bonds issued in the international market. Okay. So that is how this is basically done with an intention to reduce the exchange rate risk between the dollar and the rupee. So that is how there is less likelihood of effect of the variation in the exchange rate if a masala bond is issued. Next, easing conditions relating to external commercial borrowings. If you ease the conditions relating to external commercial borrowings, lot of investors will start what you call taking this money from the international market. That is how the negative effect of it will basically create a confidence in the Indian economy. That is how the negative effects of foreign exchange risk will be addressed. So that is how it is also not one of the measures. So finally, the left is following an expansionary monetary policy. See, you know that we have two types of monetary policies. One is contractionary, the other is expansionary. See, when we say expansionary monetary policy, here the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI, it tries to infuse money in the market. And when it is the contractionary monetary policy, it will try to remove the excess money from the market. So here, in case of an expansionary monetary policy, it may lead to a situation of inflation, that is the increase in the or rise in the value of goods and services. If the price increases, it will have a negative effect on the exports, where your products will become costlier with comparison to international market, thereby reducing the amount of exports and thereby reducing the incoming of dollars. So this is how, which one of the following is not the most likely measure the government of India or RBI takes to stop the slide of Indian rupee? They will not take this measure. That is how the correct option is option D here. Okay. Next, Consider the following statements. It says the Reserve Bank of India's recent directive relating to storage of payment systems data. This is recent with respect to the year in which this question was asked, related to storage of payment systems data. That is basically we spoke about in the classroom settings. Sometimes I don't know which all batches I have taken this. I spoke about localization of data. Localization of data. This is related to that. Okay. Popularly known as data diktat, command the payment system providers that they shall ensure that the entire data relating to payment systems operated by them are stored in a system only in India. Here the words that have to be underlined is your payment systems. Data related to your payment systems would be your passwords, your usernames, your ATM pins and other card details or the bank details. So as per the storage of payment system data as directed by RBI, they have to be necessarily stored in India alone. That is how the first statement is a correct statement. Second, they shall ensure that these systems are owned and operated by public sector enterprises. This is an incorrect statement. It could be a public sector enterprise or it could also be a private sector as well. It could also be a private sector as well. Third one, they shall submit the consolidated system audit report to the Controller and Auditor General of India. See, the Controller and Auditor General of India has got no role to play in the payment systems of our economy. It is basically the RBI which is the regulator of the payment systems in our economy. That is how the third statement as well is an incorrect statement. So that is how the correct option here would be option A, that is one only, wherein the payment systems operated, data related to the payment system has to be necessarily stored in a system in India only. See, companies like MasterCard, which occupies a major chunk of the card, domain in the economy. This was the most hesitant to this move, but Reserve Bank had put its foot down and it says that nothing doing, you have to store your data in India alone or else you can very much leave the market. Okay. And with the RuPay cards and all coming that point of time, MasterCard had no option other than to accept this data diktat of the Reserve Bank of India, right? So it was important from the examination perspective there. And one more thing, this is very, very closely related to our cyber security also, wherein BN Sri Krishna committee also spoke about what you call localization of data, that the data has to be stored within the domain of geographical domain of India. Okay, next. Consider the following statements related to poverty. Poverty is a very important aspect. See, this question was straight away picked from as it is. They did not even change the word. It said, before Tendulkar and Rangarajan committee, in India, poverty was designed with reference to a single dimension. And what was this single dimension? The single dimension was your calories intake. Calories intake. So that is how the first statement is correct. The second, it says the multi-dimensional poverty index. The multi-dimensional poverty index uses different factors to determine poverty. As we are aware that the multi-dimensional poverty index basically uses the different aspects related to health, related to your education, and also related to your standard of living. So yes, it uses multiple factors or different factors, right? So that is how this statement is also a correct statement. That is how the answer is option C, both A and B. Also, within this human development index, right? See the multi what you call dimensional poverty index also uses the same index as the human development index, right? And one more aspect you have to remember here is it replaced the human poverty index, earlier human poverty index. So that is how both the statements are correct. That is how the answer is both A and B. Next, employment. In the context of any country, which one of the following would be considered as part of its social capital? Very, very important. Social capital here they are talking about. They are not talking about economic capital. What does social capital constitute? As we are aware that social capital in any country, it may be India or any country. That's why they said in context of any country, right? It will constitute, of what you call issues like your values, your norms, your relationships, your culture, your rituals, your trust. What is the reciprocity? What you call percentage. What is the bonding between the humans? So these all constitute the social capital. So we'll see what all is the correct. Would be considered part of social. The proportion of literates in the population. The proportion of literates in the population. The stock of its buildings, other infrastructure and the machines, the size of population in the working age group. If you see somewhere, all these three aspects are more closer to not social capital, but somewhere closer to economic capital. And the last line says, the level of mutual trust and harmony, the factors which I spoke about when I gave a definition of social capital, that trust, harmony, relationships, bonding, your culture, your rituals, all are part of your social capital. So the level of mutual trust and harmony can be considered as part of your social capital. That is how the option is option D. Next, disguised unemployment generally means, right? Disguised unemployment generally means large number of people remain unemployed. No. Alternative employment is not available. No. Marginal productivity of the labor is zero. Yes. This is the correct statement. So this guy is technically not contributing at all positive to the output. Even if this guy is removed, it will not have a major impact on the level of output in that particular sector. So that kind of employment is called disguised employment. So here, because he's talking about unemployment, disguised unemployment generally means basically though he is employed, it is technically he is unemployed. Why? Because he is neither contributing, he is not at all contributing positive to the output in that particular sector. So the marginal productivity of the labor is technically zero. Right? So correct answer is option C here. See, next we are venturing into agriculture and food management related topics. So in the past, questions have come maximum from basically two aspects, that is procurement related questions, wherein the MSP, your FRP, what are the various elements involved in MSP, FRP and other things. Then various trends in Indian agriculture, what are the various new crops, the seasons of crops and other things. The geographical indication related questions might come from here. Then various schemes related to agriculture. So these three occupy the major domain of questions that are being asked in the past couple of years. But this agricultural credit, for some reasons, over couple of years, some questions are coming from this aspect as well. When they talk about agriculture credit, they are basically talking about your priority sector lending norms and other types of schemes and other things by the government where agricultural credit is provided through institutional arrangements, through institutional arrangements like banks, etc. They are trying to ask some questions from this domain as well. So procurement domain, your trends domain, and schemes and agricultural credit. These are most important domains when it comes to agriculture and food management in our country, right? The economic cost, very important, concept wise, economic cost of food grains to the FCI, the Food Corporation of India, is MSP and bonus, if any, paid to the farmer, plus what, right? Before we go into the options, let's understand what is the economic cost of food grains. See, the economic cost will include one, your procurement cost, two, your procurement price, and three, your distribution cost. So all these three combinedly constitute your economic cost, right? Here, the procurement cost is separate than procurement price. This is what you use your MSP, procurement price. The cost of procurement and the cost of distribution could be costs related to your transportation. It could be related to your handling charges. It could be related to your freight, your labor charges, cost of storage, etc., etc., etc. So now it says the economic cost of food grains to the Food Corporation of India is minimum support price, that is the procurement price, and bonus, if any, declared by the government, which is paid to the farmer, plus here we will talk about the procurement incidentals and the distribution cost. This is your procurement incidental cost and your distribution cost. So that is how the correct option is option C here. A very important question from the domain of FPI, and FPI is in news. If you are following the economic news, recently FPI was in news because FCI was in news because there are a lot of crisis which is happening related to food storage in our country because of bumper crops, and already we have more than the buffer stock of rice, wheat, and all. And if we go for the next what do you call harvesting season, the FCI says I do not have space to store these food grains. So there was a very elaborate article in Live Mill and Economic Times. I suggest you please go through the entire content of that particular article. Some very important aspects related to buffer stock, some details have been given. So that might come as a question in your prelims. Okay. Next, from agriculture, it says consider the following statements. The quantity of imported edible oils is more than the domestic production of edible oils in the last 5 years. So very important here is this vegetables oil is again in news. I will tell you why. So very important from the edible oil or vegetable oil. It is very important from the prelims 2020 as well. See here what happens is, as we are aware that we are more dependent on the importing of this edible oil than the domestic production, which is very less. So and it has considerably increased in the past 5 years. Even if it was 10 years, the statement would have been correct. And the second statement says that the government does not impose any customs duty on all the imported edible oils as a special case. This is exactly opposite. It is exactly opposite. The government imposes customs duty even to the tune of 50% at times. This was in news. Why? Because recently Malaysia happens to be one of the countries from where we import lot of edible oils, right? Very recently the government has decided to increase the custom duties on import of edible oils from Malaysia from 45% to 50%. So that is how it is imported from the examination perspective, prelims 2020. right? So the second statement is a completely incorrect statement. That is how the correct option would be option A, that is 1 only. So the next question is agriculture, very important, related to minimum support price, very important aspect from the point of view of your examination. There are so many aspects related to MSP. I suggest all the students must definitely by heart all the items listed in the MSP, because over a period of time these kind of questions are repetitive in nature. So you might surely expect a question on minimum support price, right? We'll read the question. It says, consider the following: areca nut, barley, coffee, millet, groundnut, sesame, and turmeric. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has announced the MSP for which of the above items? If you are aware, item number 1 and item number 7. Item number 1 and item number 7 are not under the minimum support price. So that is how the correct answer here would be 2, 4, 5 and 6. That is, other than 1 and 7, all the items are included in the MSP. You have to by heart all these 22 items listed under the minimum support price of the government of India, right? Here we should also know the concepts related to FRP, that is fair and remunerative price. It is basically for sugar and it is declared by the Department of Food and Public Distribution. Very important aspect other than MSP. And when it comes to MSP, it is recommended by the CACP and it is announced by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. Moving ahead, industry. From the industry domain, it says, which of the following is issued by the registered foreign portfolio investors? See, these registered foreign portfolio investors is the nomenclature used to represent the FPIs by RBI. They are called registered foreign portfolio investors. Registered with whom? Registered not with RBI, registered with Securities Exchange and Board of India, SEBI, right? It says, which of the following is issued by the registered foreign portfolio investors to overseas investors who want to be part of the Indian stock market without registering themselves? If you have attended my class, the participatory note. Say, for example, a person by name, say Tom Cruise. He wants to invest in the Indian stock market, ICM. And we'll assume that he is an individual investor and he is not willing to register himself. In the case, he has to get in touch with a registered foreign portfolio investor from where he will invest his money, who in turn will invest the money in the Indian stock market. But when Tom Cruise will register with the registered foreign portfolio investor, he in turn will give a document to Tom Cruise saying that in my overall investment in the Indian stock market, your investment is the tune of, say for example, 100 crores. So this document given by the FPI to Tom Cruise is called your participatory note. It says that you have participated in my investment in Indian stock market to the extent of 100 crores. One very important aspect, the government has what you call initiated KYC norms for issuance of P notes. Earlier, the registered foreign portfolio investor was not duty bound to give any information to SEBI regarding the P note investors. But because of information related to lot of money laundering activities, funds being redirected through the P notes into the Indian stock market, it was decided to introduce the KYC norms for P notes. Once the KYC norms for the P notes have been introduced, the participation of P notes in the Indian stock market has come to a big zero. Now there is no participation. Why? Because the moment KYC norms would be initiated, the registered foreign portfolio investor will have to tell to SEBI who is the investor. As a lot of money was coming through this platform of money laundering, people opted out of your PIN. Okay. Next. In the index of 8 core industries, which one of the following is given the highest weightage in the index of 8 core industries? See, for this, first you should know which are those core industries, and you should know the percentage also. For your information, other than what is specified here, the other core industries, you have your petroleum refinery products is one. You have your crude oil, you have your natural gas, and you also have steel, electricity. Electricity is already covered. You also have cement. So these are the 8 core industries which are part of your index of industrial production, IIP. Very, very important. I'll talk about IIP, but before that, in these given options, electricity is the highest at 19.85%, if I remember it correctly. But however, when it comes to overall, the petroleum and refinery products constitute the major chunk of approximately 28.04%. But within the given options, electricity is the highest contributor. That is why it is called, the option is option B, because it is given which has given the highest weightage. Overall highest weightage is petroleum refinery, but because it has not been given in the option, that is how the second most highest is your electricity generation. That is 19.85%. After electricity, then your steel is somewhere between 17.92. I suggest you by heart this particular information. And your crude oil is, and coal is before coal, crude oil, your coal is some 10.33%. Then comes your crude oil at some 8.98%. After crude oil, I think it is natural gas. It will come around 6.88%. Then is your cement with some 2.63%. So that is how. Then fertilizer at very bare minimum 2.63% or something. Okay. So that is how. Cement is not 2.63, correction. Cement is around 5.37%. So that is how, this is the percentage of highest weightage. You should know the lowest, you should know the highest, and I suggest you by heart all the figures, right? And the industrial in the IIP index. See, IIP index is based on 3 pillars. Very important from the examination point of view. The first is the 3 pillars constitute your mining, your manufacturing, and also lastly is your electricity. 3 important pillars of IIP. And within the IIP, manufacturing has the highest weightage, approximately 77.63% is given to manufacturing. See, what does IIP does? It basically tracks the manufacturing activity in different sectors of an economy. See, in the mining, there is only one product. In electricity, there is only one product. But in the manufacturing, in the IIP, there are some 405 products. So this is very, very important. And the IIP is released every month by the Central Statistical Organization, which is under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And the base year is 2011-12. Very important, all these facts, right? So you can make a note of this. Next, what is /are the recent policy initiatives of Government of India to promote the growth of manufacturing sector? So all these are not only this. I suggest you go through the Economic Survey 2019-2020. Various other efforts of the government have been listed. all this, setting up the NIMZ, providing benefit of single window clearance, and establishing of technical acquisition and development fund. See, the NIMZ is very, very important from prelims 2020 perspective. I don't know whether you are aware or not. Your Sangareddy district in Telangana, got the first final approval for establishment of NIMZ. Very, very important, right? See, these NIMZ, National Investment and Manufacturing Zones, are basically important instruments of your national manufacturing policy of 2011, right? They are basically aimed at providing conducive business environment to manufacturing industries. They have a specific aim, right? So they have an aim to increase the share of manufacturing to 25% of GDP from the present share of manufacturing, right? And also create around 100 million jobs in over the next decade, right? As of now, if I remember, some 3 NIMZ have got final approvals. Total in principle approval for 13 NIMZ, but however 3 have got final approval. One in Andhra Pradesh, if I remember correctly, Prakasam district. The first was your Sangareddy, second was your Prakasam district, and third somewhere in Odisha. So these are the 3 places where it has got final approval. Next, providing the benefit of single window clearance, yes, and establishing the technology acquisition and development fund. See, basically this technology acquisition and development fund, it is basically to facilitate the acquisition of clean, green, energy efficient technologies by the micro, small and medium enterprises. So that is how the correct option is option D, 1, 2 and 3. Next, we are going into a very, very important sector like external sector of India, and over a period of time, considerable questions have come from the exchange rate dynamics related questions, balance of payment related questions, and most importantly, external trade related questions. So these are very, very important questions. This year, the forex reserves is also important because India has got the highest ever forex reserves of around $450 billion, more than that rather, right? So this is the first time that we have touched this figure in our foreign exchange reserves. Maybe a question might come in from that particular domain. We'll see what all type of questions have been asked in the past. Most of India's external debt is owned by the government entities. See, you might get confused here, but you have to understand that this is not a correct statement. Most of the debt, if you see the economic survey, which gives a detailed analysis of the external debt of India, you will find that the non-government debt constitutes the major portion of external debt, right? And the sovereign debt is not the major portion, right? And so the first statement is incorrect, right? And the second statement says all of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars. Again, this is an incorrect statement, right? It is denominated in multiple, what you call currencies, like it is also there in rupees. If you remember the masala bonds and other things, it is also there in yen. It is also there in euros. It is also there in, SDR, the special drawing rights of, the IMF. So it is not only the US dollars. Very, very important from the examination point of view. That is how the correct option is D, neither 1 nor 2. Next study, which of the following is not a sub-index of the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index? It is very simple, very straight. All the 10 parameters you should by heart. What is India's position? Where all India has improved? Where all India has not improved? But there is something known as distance to frontier concept also. Distance to frontier concept also. This also you must be aware. I will explain this distance to frontier concept in the questionnaire. At the end of this class discussion. If I forget, please somebody remind me. So as we can know that maintenance of law and order is not part of the sub-indices of the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index, right? So that is how paying taxes, registering property, dealing with construction permits, and there are many other, what you call sub indices. Some 7 left out of the 10, so you have to by heart that, right? Next, with reference to IFC masala bonds, sometimes seen in the news, which of the following statement is or correct? The IFC, International Finance Corporation, which offers this bond, is an arm of the World Bank. Yes, World Bank Group. See, World Bank has got two these things, World Bank and World Bank Group. When we talk about IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, plus International Development Agency, IDA, these two constitute the World Bank. And when we say World Bank Group, we are talking about these two plus the International Finance Corporation for your Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA. Then we are talking about International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID, right? So all these 5 constitute the World Bank Group. And the question here, the International Finance Corporation, it is basically a what do you call private sector assistance provider. Various domains like education and all. If you are following the IFC news closely, very recently Byju's online platform got some loan assistance from the IFC, International Finance Corporation. But most important is private, it only gives loan to private sectors. So that is how the second statement is incorrect, because they did not ask this question with perspective to masala bonds. They asked this question with perspective to IFC's masala bond. That is how this public sector will not come. Had IFC not been there, so masala bonds can be raised by public sector also. So that is how the answer here would be answer A. One only, right? But had it been only masala bond and not IFC, public sector bank also. Very recently, the NTPC also issued some, green masala bonds. Your HDFC issued some, masala bonds. So now the private sector along with the public sector is also issuing masala bonds. Next, export. Among the agricultural commodities imported by India, which one of the following accounts for the highest import in terms of value in the last 5 years? This is irrespective of whichever year this question is asked. You can safely put answer as vegetable oils, because this is the one which we import the highest. Moving ahead, export and import. Which one of the following groups of items is included in India's foreign exchange reserve? Very, very, very important from the examination point of view. The first option says foreign currency assets, SDRs, and loans from foreign countries. Loans have no, share in the foreign reserves. There is no share of loans. Then says foreign currency assets, gold holdings of the RBI and SDR. This is the correct statement. The third says foreign currency assets, again loan comes. No, loan is not there. Here also loan comes, loan is not there. So that is, it is foreign currency assets, your gold holdings of RBI and SDR. And within these 3, the foreign currency assets are the highest amongst the foreign forex reserves of our country. Right? Next, which of the following would include FDI investment in India? Subsidiaries of foreign companies in India? Yes. Majority foreign equity holding in Indian companies? Yes. Majority, yes. Companies exclusively financed by the foreign companies? Yes. Portfolio investments? Yes. So here, but portfolio investment is on the stock market. So that is the reason why you do not take the portfolio investment into consideration here, because this is only investment directly in the stock market and not in the per se. So that is how the correct option is option D, 1, 2 and 3, FDI, foreign direct investment. And I've already said the difference between FDI and FII. If the investment in a particular company goes beyond 10%, it is deemed to be foreign direct investment. If it is less than 10%, it is deemed to be a foreign institutional investment. And one more important aspect, if an investment is classified as FDI even once. After that, if the investment percentage is reduced beyond 10%, it will continue to be called as foreign direct investment. Very important, because we control the FDI investment sector wise. We control the FDI investment sector wise. Very, very important from the examination perspective, because lot of rationalization of the FDI norms have happened in the recent past. Insurance, banking, defense, everything has been rationalized. So you have to know all those facts and figures. Next, which one of the following is the purpose of Uday scheme of the government? A very simple, straight question. Providing, last option is D, providing for financial turnaround and revival of the power distribution company. This was established in the year 2016 somewhere. Uday scheme. Okay, very simple and straight question. With reference to Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, very important concept related to Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. It says, under this scheme, farmers will have to pay a uniform premium. This is a wrong statement. Why? Because the premium differs for various crops. For Kharif crops, the premium is around 2%. For Rabi crops, the premium is around 1.5%. And for other annual crops like your horticulture and other, it is 5% premium that has to be paid by the borrowers, paid by the farmers, right? This scheme covers post-harvest losses arising out of cyclones and unseasonal rains. This is a correct statement. So option B is the correct statement. Why in use? Again, why? Because if there is a farmer who has taken a loan, he has to perforce take this Bima Yojana. If the farmer is there who has taken Kisan credit card, he has to perforce take this Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. Very important from the examination point of view, prelims 2020, because very recently Maharashtra has been declared as the first state to integrate its land records with the web portal of Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So maybe a question in prelims somewhere. So very important from the examination point of view, this particular scheme. And remember, this scheme follows something known as an area approach basis. The loan, the compensation and other things are devised on a platform called area approach basis, and it is under the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Very important. Next, in India, which of the following review the independent regulators in sectors like telecom, insurance, electricity, etc.? This question was asked way back, a very old question, not very important, but however the answer is first two. The last three do not have any, regulatory, regulatory powers related to this sector. They are all recommendatory. They are all recommendatory in nature. Not very important. This kind of questions may not come. Next, infrastructure. Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board is the first regulatory board developed by, set up by the government of India. This is not the case. Many regulatory bodies have been established before that. So the first statement is an incorrect statement, right? Next, one of the tasks of the Petroleum Natural Gas Regulatory Board is to ensure competitive markets for gas. Yes. Appeals against the decision of the PNGRB go before the appellate tribunals for electricity. This is also a correct statement. So the correct answer is 2 and 3 here. Now I'll start with the the Nandan Nilekani Committee on the Digital Payment. This is important from the examination point of view because the Reserve Bank of India had recently appointed this committee. See, this Nandan Nilekani, this guy is you can say he's the architect. You can say that he's the architect of your Aadhaar card. The former chairman of your Infosys. Nandan Nilekani is also considered to be the architect of what Aadhaar card we have. He is the mastermind before that, behind that. Okay, so this basically we wanted an agency to give some recommendations related to how we have to develop the platform of this digital payments in our country, so that the burden on dependency on cash transactions is reduced. Why? Because there are a lot of incidental charges on printing of currency, transportation, its safekeeping and its redistribution, its circulation, its dispensing of the what you call torn notes and other things. There are a lot of issues with that. So to overcome with all these issues, the Reserve Bank of India wanted to, go in much, go ahead in much detailed integration into the market, where it wants to have a digital platform. So with an intention to create some recommendations, it appointed a committee chaired by a person called Nandan Nilekani. So he gave some very, very important recommendations which are important from the prelims perspective. He says that whatever transaction charges on digital payments made to the government, most importantly, transaction charges on digital payments made to the government should be removed. So there should not be any fees, transaction charges made to the government or state-run entities and central departments. And secondly, he says that the merchant discount rate, there should be a cut, there should be a reduction in the merchant discount rate. Again, it is very important. What is this merchant discount rate? It is basically the cost paid by a merchant to a bank for accepting payment from their customers via digital platforms. It is generally, expressed in percentage of transaction cost, varying from 1% to 3%. He says that this has to be reduced. Again, in news, merchant discount rate. Why? Because it has been mandated by the government that businesses with more than 50 crores turnover annually, there should not be any merchant discount rate levied either on the customer or the merchant. So any business entity which has got more than 50 crores turnover, it should not levy any merchant discount rate. Okay. He also spoke about, see, there is a custom duty levied on the point of sales machine. See, all these recommendations are, basically with an intention to increase the digital payments, platforms. So you will see that what all various infrastructure facilities are related with digital payments. He is asking for reducing the taxes and tariffs and other custom duties and all. He says the removal of existing 18% import duty on the point of sales machines for a period of 3 years should be done, so that more point of sales machines are what you call imported, right? And he's also asking about reducing the GST on digital transactions, reducing the digital GST on digital transactions, so that the more penetration of digital payments would be done, right? And he also says that setting up an acceptance development fund, very, very important, an acceptance development fund, basically, which will be used for developing merchants in poorly served areas, so that more digital transactions happen in remote areas, right? And he also talks about when you rely more on machine driven what you call payment system, the number of protection from fraud and risk will also automatically get reduced. Frauds and risks should also be reduced, right? And he also talks about your complaint redressal mechanism. There should be a proper complaint redressal mechanism that has to be established, so that people having any complaints, they can what you call approach this particular body for their complaint redressal. And one most importantly, he says that the target for additional growth of volume of digital payments by 10 times, 10 times in 3 years. He says there should be a target of increasing the digital payments by 10 times in the 3 years, and the growth will be driven by, he says, driven by low cost transactions. It will be driven by high volume. It will be driven by high volume, and it will be driven by low cost, what you call, low cost transaction costs, right? So these are the three pillars. He's saying we can achieve this 10 times increase in 3 years. See, this is all about your Nandan Nilekani Committee on Digital Payments, right? Next we come to NBFC crisis, very, very important. But before NBFC crisis, I will try to talk about your NPS. Within that NPS, I will try to cover the NBFC crisis as well. See, as you all might be aware, NPAs, it has been very much in the news for some wrong reasons. It says that, what is an NPA? We know the definition. It says that NPA is defined as a credit facility in respect of which we say that the interest or the principal has remained overdue for a specified period of time. And there are various parameters. For agricultural loans it is different, for term loans it is different. I will not get into that, right? So but this problem of NPAs, what happened is, see, non-performing asset, it is called a non-performing asset because for banks its loans are its assets. Its loans are its assets. And if the people are not paying back their loans on time, it means the assets of the banks have started non-performing. Right? And it says that we have a period of now 90 days. There is some small history to this. See, earlier this classification of NPA was not 90 days. As on 31st March, very important, I suggest you make a note of this, 1993, for the classification of an asset to be a non-performing asset, their duration was 4 quarters. Just imagine 1 year, 4 quarters. 1 quarter is 3 months, okay? So if an asset is not paying back in 4 quarters, that was when it was classified as NPA. By the time it was 1994, it was brought down to 3 quarters. And again in 1995, it was brought down to 2 quarters. 2 quarters means again 6 months. Here 9 months, here 12 months, here 6 months. Again in the year 2001, it was brought down to 180 days. Right? So now, if you see here, gradually the period of time is reducing. And finally, after 2004, it was said that if any asset is not paying in that specified period of 90 days, it will be classified as non-performing asset, right? So here, the result of growing NPS could be attributed to the classification of the asset reducing from 4 quarters to straight away 90 days, that is 2 months, from 12 months to 2 months. So this is also one of the factors that has contributed to the increased number of non-performing assets by the banks, right? Other than this, during the period of heavy boom, right from 2004-5 till 2007-8, this was a period of economic boom when lot of credit was, a lot of aggressive lending. The word is aggressive lending was resorted to by the banks. This resulted in creation of some spurious assets for the banks. Spurious assets for the bank. This is one of the factors which was responsible for the growth of NPS. Then there were cases of willful defaults that was also responsible for the growth of NPS. This was also an important factor. Corruption. We saw this in case of your PNB and others. Then this was also one of the reasons economic slowdown post your global financial crisis of 2008 and years beyond 2008. Also, some global factors were also responsible, right? And lastly, but not the least, some sectoral shocks were also responsible for the growth of NPS, like your power sector, like your iron and steel sector, like your infrastructure sector. This sector faced the, what you call, wrath of the global financial crisis and the economic slowdown. So that is how these are some of the reasons for the growth of NPS. See, very recently this NPA is in news. Why? Because the government, as a statement of Nirmala Sitharaman, she says that the government has adopted the strategy of 4 Rs with respect to NPAs, and it says that with respect to comparison from 2018 to 2019, the NPAs have come down by some 84,000 crores. That is what she says. And what are these 4 Rs? Let's have a look. The 4 Rs it says is, one is recognition. We'll deal with them in detail. Second is your resolution. So resolution. Third is your recapitalization. And lastly, your reforms. So they say that we are planning to target this NPA problem under 4 heads: recognition, resolution, recapitalization, and reforms. We'll try to understand what all this mean. Recognition, recognizing that a particular asset is not performing now. How we will come to know? It could be through annual financial inspections by the RBI. It could be through a special inspection called asset quality review, which was done by RBI in the year 2015 when Raghuram Rajan was the governor of RBI. He carried out one asset quality review wherein it was felt that the banks are under-reporting their NPS. To catch hold of those people who are not reporting their NPS properly, the Reserve Bank of India conducted annual quality review of all the banks in the year 2015. And it was found that glaringly, means largely, banks under-reported their NPA. So the first stage, what the government is saying now is, we will try to recognize who all are NPAs through our platforms like annual financial inspection, which is done by the RBI of all the banks, and the asset quality review as and when required. After 2015, the asset quality review has not been carried out. It is as and when required. And then it talks about resolution, how to resolve these issues. This is the most important part of your NPA topic per se. Under resolution, we have developed something known as insolvency and bankruptcy code. Under resolution, we have something known as inter-creditor agreement. Under resolution, we have something known as SARFAESI Act. Under resolution, we have something known as asset reconstruction companies. These all are aiming at resolving the problems related to your NPA. This is the aim of their, formulation. Next, recapitalization. See, in the share of overall NPAs, public sector banks has the major share. If the government recapitalizes them, obviously the share of NPS will come down gradually, right? So that is how it is talking about recapitalization. Through Indradhanush scheme and other things, the government has infused so much of capital into this public sector banks. And lastly, it talks about various reforms that have to be carried forward, like your insolvency bank, your bank board bureau has been established, insolvency and bankruptcy board has been established, so and so forth. It has established a lot of organizations for bringing out reforms in the sectors. So these are all aspects which are aimed at reducing the number of NPAs in our market, right? As per a figure released by the RBI, NPAs of public sector banks as on 30th September 2019, they stood at somewhere around 7.2 lakh crores. right? And it has reduced in the last 1 year, right? It is as per the Financial Stability Report of December 2019. Very important report of RBI, Financial Stability Report, half-yearly report given in 2019. So we'll move ahead. Next, NBFC crisis. See, very important you have to understand here is what is an NBFC, non-banking financial company. Very important from the examination perspective. See, as I said earlier in one of the question discussions, the non-banking financial companies are sometimes referred to as shadow banks. Very important, sometimes referred to as shadow banks. Why? Because what is the NBFC? They are financial institutions that offer various banking services. They offer banking services but do not have the banking license. See, this NBFC crisis, you all might be aware, IL and FS, what you call scam that has happened. See, basically, NBFC is a financial institution that draws money from the market and lends. I'll give you a very classic example here. See, what is happening is the banks have very strict norms and regulations in giving a loan. So what happens is lot of people go out of the scope of the bank, out of the scope of the bank credit, That is where the NBFC plays an important role. I'll give a classic example here. You have this Bajaj Electronics. When you go to the Bajaj Electronics, you will see some representatives of NBFC like Bajaj Finance and all. So these are the entities who are giving loan without any strict norms and all. So that is the reason why there has been a spurt in the what you call economy of the FMCG goods, right? FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, because of the liberal funding by the your non-banking financial companies. But the moment this IL and FS, now tell me, where does this NBFC get the money from? It gets money from, see, institutions through, it gets money from banks and other things through the platform of issue of commercial papers, through issue of debentures and all. One most important aspect you have to realize is that the NBFC cannot accept a demand deposit. It is not part of the payment systems of our country, and it cannot issue a check drawn on itself, right? And the DICGC, the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation of India, the insurance for the depositors is not available to the NBFCs. So these are some of the parameters of functioning of NBFC. So here, through the platform of commercial papers and debentures, the NBFC, raises money for a period of 3 to 4 years. Now, NBFC, the maximum portion of the credit that is extended by NBFC is in the housing sector, is in the real estate sector, right? And also to automobile industries, So what happened is, once this IL and FS fraud happened, the money that NBFC was getting through the commercial papers and the debentures, it went down drastically, right? When the money went down drastically, what NBFC did was, and when these sectors were not performing very well, so the asset creation of the NBFCs went down and the money flow to the NBFCs went down drastically, because people started fearing investing money. And who is a major chunk player of investing money in the NBFC? Your mutual fund organizations, right? So that is how, when there was a crisis in IL and FS, these mutual funds and banks and other entities started fearing investing money in the what you call NBFC. That is why there was a liquidity crunch. In the NBFCs. This resulted In one side, the assets got eroded. In the other side, people stopped giving them loans. That is how they faced a lot of liquidity crunch, and they started faltering on their what you call payment obligations, and that is why increased NPA crisis. So this is all about your NBFC crisis, right? Your Basel norms, very very important. Most important aspect of the Basel norms is, see, as I said, Basel is it is actually a state. It is a place in Switzerland by name Basel, where the BIS is stationed. Which is responsible for developing the. See, what happened is, the Bank for International Settlements. Bank for International Settlements. This is the organization, BIS, which was established in the year 1930 somewhere in Switzerland. This was the entity that was responsible for preparing the global standards for ensuring the monetary and financial stability So over a period of time, the Basel gave three what you call recommendations. One was Basel 1, then Basel 2, and now Basel 3 recommendations. And under the Basel 3 recommendations, there are basically three pillars. There are basically three pillars in the Basel requirements, right? The first pillar says that it has to improve the banking sector's ability to absorb ups and downs from financial and economic instability. So whatever instabilities arising out of the financial or the economic instability, the banks have to be able to cope up the risk arising out of these instabilities in the market. It also says that there is a need to improve the risk management ability and governance of banking sector. This is the second pillar. And lastly, it says strengthen the transparency and disclosure norms of the banks. So these are the three main pillars on which the entire Basel requirements are set, right? So one important aspect it said is, what it does is it identifies the globally systemically important banks. Like we have domestic systemically important banks, the Basel identifies the globally systemic important banks, and it says that it says that there have to be some quantitative as well as qualitative indicators to gauge the functioning of these globally systemically important banks. And as per Basel's, India's SBI, India's HDFC, and India's ICICI have been classified as globally systemically important banks. So what is this globally systemically important banks? It says that the systemic risk profile is deemed to be of such importance of these particular banks that it will have a chain reaction on the entire global economy. It means if SBI fails as a bank, not only India as a country would be affected, but the entire global economy would be affected. The same way we have domestic systemically important banks. We said that what is the criteria of declaring a domestic systemically important bank? Any banks whose net worth exceeds 2% of our GDP are classified as domestic systemically important banks. So you need to understand the difference between these the three pillars. And I said the counter cyclical capital buffer. So we have postponed this till June 2020. So as of now, it is postponed. So we are still not completely compliant with the Basel III norms. Very important. Okay. Yeah, this base erosion and profit shifting. This is the last, what do you call this thing of today's lecture. BEPS, very important. See, what happened was, there are, what is this concept of base erosion and profit shifting? It basically, refers to the strategies adopted by multinational companies, adopted by multinational companies to shift their profits, to shift their profits from high tax jurisdictions to low tax jurisdictions. So what they do is, say for example, a company ABC Limited, which is a foreign entity, has earned some 100 crores of profit in India, right? So just before the payment of tax, what this company will do is, it will say that I have to pay some royalty to my main company, which is there in Singapore. So it will transfer the major chunk of profits, say 98 crores or something, to Singapore, where the tax base is very low. So here in India, it will pay tax on only 2 crores of profit, and in Singapore, because the tax base is very less, it will end up paying very low tax or maybe even zero tax there. So overall, what it has done, it had eroded the base. Why? Because had this 98 crores been in India, India would have got some tax revenue. So the base where the economic activity was conducted, they have eroded the base. That is why it is called base erosion, and it shifted the profit from India to Singapore. So it is called base erosion and profit shifting. This is a very, very important tool which these multinational companies use to transfer their profits to low tax jurisdictions. That's all, friends. I think with this, we come to the end of today's lecture related to the concepts, in the presentation, followed by some current affair topics.